welcome to the Liberty Insider. This is your program bringing you news, views, discussion and insights on religious liberty events and theory even in the US and around the world. My name is Lincoln Steed, editor of Liberty magazine, and my guest on this program is my son Christopher Steed, still a teenager, a young man that sometimes listens to his dad and I know has some opinions on religious liberty. And you've traveled with our family a few places, and I want to pick up on one of the trips you may not remember. I think you're about 12. You should remember. We went to Europe. Remember Europe?
I remember Europe. I remember parts of it.
You remember Rome?
I do remember.
It says all
Rome.
roads lead to Rome, and we ended up in Rome. We drove down through Switzerland. We actually went into Italy and then Venice and then worked our way down, and we ended up in Rome. I even remember pointing out to you the 7 hills, not too big, but there are 7 hills around Rome. And there we saw all of the monuments stretched out, and we spent a couple of days. And one of the things that I showed you, but you probably don't remember, but it was significant to me, was Pilate's staircase.
I do remember. I believe we walked up the staircase.
Yes.
I believe we did.
It's a marble staircase. Yep. And there were, as we walked up, there were pilgrims kneeling and doing it one knee step at a time, praying all the way.
Yep.
Now, this is supposedly the same staircase as Pilate's staircase in Jerusalem, which was destroyed by Rome. And I don't know if I showed you at the time, but I've seen it since on a trip to Rome, that there's the Arch of Titus, the general that destroyed Jerusalem. And there's carvings there that show them bringing back the candlesticks and other treasures from the temple in Jerusalem to Rome after destroying Israel, or destroying Jerusalem. But Pilate's staircase is very pivotal to the Reformation, because there was a certain monk named Martin Luther. Mm-hmm. He had some personal problems in his life. He had a great sense of guilt. He was trying to overcompensate for a father that wanted a lot out of him, wanted to be a lawyer. So he was challenging his dad to go into the priesthood. He then had problems with feeling accepted by God. There's no question Martin Luther had issues.
Oh, yes.
As they say. And his abbot, I think it was, thought that he could solve some of that by sending Martin Luther on a pilgrimage to Rome. And he was quite bothered to see the wealth of the church and the lack of religious fervor in many ways. And then on one occasion, he went to Pilate's staircase, this rebuilt staircase from the destruction of Jerusalem, being supposedly carried and rebuilt in Rome. And the pilgrims would go up one step at a time, hoping to gain favor with God. And Martin Luther started up those stairs on his knees. And halfway up, he suddenly remembered the text, "The just shall live by faith alone."
Not by acts. And
he leapt to his feet, and supposedly that was the big moment theologically where he started the Reformation, because he saw that what the church was doing in selling time out of purgatory, of making you confess to the priest thinking that he had the route to God, was all misdirected. So the Reformation was a big moment, and you've been to one of the places where that kicked off. You've also been to Geneva, where another one of the great reformers, John Calvin, rose up. And at one stage, Calvin was even made basically the mayor of Geneva and ruled it from a religious point of view, which wasn't good. And sadly, he even used his power. Well, he didn't so much use it, but he didn't stop the persecution of another religious leader, Michael Servetus, and they put him to death because he held different religious reasons. So the Reformation was a good move, but not everything that happened was great. But I do believe that so much of what we hold today we owe to the Reformation. Do you have that sense?
I believe that most of all, we believe that, yes, it does tie back to the Reformation, yes.
I don't know that you've read it, and I need to make sure you read the book Great Controversy. Have you?
I've
probably read parts of it.
When I was in school, when I was at Honolulu Academy, we read bits of it in class. I believe it was it was either the Bible class or the English class. I can't remember exactly which class it was, but we read through it, and then we had a test on it at the end.
Good.
And I remember reading through it, and it changed my perspective on some things, but it influenced me in a very good way. I know that for sure.
Well, you know, Seventh-day Adventists, I think, have a great position in the book Great Controversy, and it was written, or it was written, but I could even use the word assembled by Ellen White, who we believe had spiritual insights. But this was put together as a service, not just for the church, but for all people. And if you look at this book structurally, what it really is mostly a collection of the history of God's dealings through the years, and in particular, there's a lot of the church history in the medieval times through the Reformation. And it's not unique history. You can get it in history books, but most people don't read that. So it's assembled here to give a tunnel vision of religious truth through the Reformation and beyond to our day. And it impressed on me when I read that book how much we owe, as both the Seventh-day Adventists, but as Christians in general at this time and place, to the Reformation. And, you know, I deal with religious liberty, and I've got to tell you, I am really impressed, sometimes a little frightened, by how at the moment the Catholic Church is ready to own the Reformation.
Yeah.
At the time, they were ready to put Martin Luther on the stake. They would have gladly burned him alive if they could, but he was protected by the civil ruler in his part of Germany, and then eventually by all the German princes. But at the moment, they're saying that the Reformation was the payoff of views within the Catholic Church that were bubbling up to reform the church. That's not really true. By definition, all of the reformers were from the Catholic context, but they were rebelling against it. They weren't carrying forward what Catholicism wanted to do. We take it further back, that they were rediscovering what Christianity originally was, and that through the ages, the church in general, and then as it became in the West, the Roman Catholic Church, had forgotten and denied, and sometimes even opposed. Do you know another figure you've heard me talk about, Oliver Cromwell?
Yes, many times.
One of my heroes.
Yes, you mentioned him a few Sabbaths ago. We were at people's house and we were talking, and you mentioned him to the husband. Yeah,
because I like to tell Americans about Oliver Cromwell. English people from England and Canada and Australia, they know all about Oliver Cromwell. Americans don't seem to. They don't realize that 100 years before American independence, in England, they had a religious civil war.
Yeah.
I mean, a full-scale civil war, and it was all over the Puritans. And I mean, it started on a political battle, but it soon turned into the Puritans fighting against the king and his Catholic sympathizers. Mm-hmm. And they beat the king, they took him prisoner, they put him on trial, and the single thing he did that made him an enemy of the state is when he was in trouble, he plotted and planned to bring a Catholic army to save him. Well, you know, in a Protestant country, that was just no good. So they cut off his head, and Oliver Cromwell became the dictator of England. Mm-hmm. Not as bad as some dictators, but it was direct rule. And the reason I'm bringing this up, I don't know that you know this, son, but when Oliver Cromwell was ruling, and England was a strong country at that point, he took on a lot of battles, and one of the worst things he did was kill the Catholic Irish, laid the problems for today. But during his reign, the Waldensian situation developed. You know about that, remember?
I do know about the Waldensians.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think if we went. No, I don't think on our trip we went to that area, but we drove past it nearby. But I've been into the mountains, which is what Waldensi means, the mountain people. And they were being persecuted by the Duke of Savoy, encouraged by Rome to get rid of these dissenters. And Oliver Cromwell said, he sent word to the Duke of Savoy, he said, unless you stop persecuting the Waldenses, he said, I personally will lead an English Protestant army to relieve them. And I think Adventists particularly should know that, because they read about the Waldenses in Great Controversy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let me ask you a leading question. Do you think of America as a Protestant country as you grow up here and seek to discover this country you're part of?
I don't see it as, yes, I do see it as a Protestant country, but I see it more so as a Christian country as well. Because one of the main religions in the United States, I remember seeing a pie chart of the world religions that are in the United States, and I remember just seeing this massive chunk that said Christianity, and I'm like, wow, that's a massive chunk of the United States that believes that Christianity is the main religion.
Yeah. Demographically, yes, you're right. It's still a Protestant country. And of course, it's not necessary that it be Protestant. We've got to keep that in mind. It's a secular country, and as we said once in a program on the Treaty of Tripoli, for all people, all religions, right? But it must mean something that it changed from mostly Protestant to such a mixture now. Do you think it's important to sort of rediscover our history a bit?
I believe that, yes, it is important to go back and review our history and to see where our roots came from. But at the same time, I believe it's good also to look forward and to see where our country is going, whether good or bad.
So it's important that it continue its protection for all faiths. That's what you're saying?
Yes.
Yeah, I agree with that. But we're entering a difficult time, and I often write in Liberty magazine, let's see if you understand the distinction. I actually once in a speech said, and I got a lot of shocked people, I said, there's way too much religion in the world today. Way too much religion. But not enough spirituality.
The way I see that is that there are way too many people believing in way too many religions, and they don't actually, they believe, but they don't have their whole heart and soul into it. I mean, there are a few in that religion that believe, well, this is the right way, this is the only way. But then I believe there are also people in that religion who say, well, yeah, this might be the way, but there might also be other ways. Like, I mean, I've even heard it in church discussions, and discussions with friends on how that, yes, Christianity is the way, but there also might be another way.
Well, that's not so good, because that means they're uncertain. But religion, a religious identity, and they talk about identity politics, without a spiritual sensibility that should go with that, means that it's just a political force, and then you fight against someone else for holding something different. True spirituality gives openness and charity and care for other people, and it's no threat to you that someone believes something differently. But it must be important to believe something, to practice it, to hold it deep in your heart, and to communicate that to others, isn't it? Is that important to you?
Well, yes, I believe religion is very, very important to me.
Well, that's reassuring, son. It should be important to all of us. That's what religious liberty is about, putting that into practice. You know, we've got a lot to talk about on this, religion versus spirituality. We'll be back after a short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to the Liberty Insider. Before the break with Christopher Steed, we were talking, starting with the Reformation, we were talking then about religion and spirituality, and of course that's very important. There was a great awakening in America in the 1750s, and one of the preacher's sermons was entitled this. You think of it: "The expulsive power of a new affection." You're a guy that has a few new affections now, now and then, like all young men. When you meet the latest girl, you don't hardly remember the other girls, do you?
Well, I mean, you do remember them, but you try to forget about them and create new memories. Right,
it fades away, and you're into this one. And that's what true religion is. It should fill you like a romantic, where you're just besotted with, fever, good word. Romantic fever. And if religion is dynamized that way, it's less likely to be into a persecuting direction. Let's back to the Reformation. the Reformation was give or take, because it started a little earlier than Martin Luther, like John Wycliffe, nearly 100 years earlier in England, and it continued after Luther. But let's think about the Reformation. They fought for personal expression. Do you feel, as a Christian, Seventh-day Adventist Christian, that you are expected even to find your own way spiritually, or do you think the pastor is the one that hands it down, and as long as you do what the pastor says, you'll find?
In my opinion, I believe that you're supposed to find your own way, yes, but you're supposed to reach out to people and say, look, hey, pastor, you know, I was reading the other day, I was reading through, let's say, Daniel. I was reading through Daniel, and I'm stuck on Daniel 4. You know, I don't understand it. You know, help me understand, and give me your opinions. And then after you've listened to him explain things to you, and to give him your opinion, or even like me and you, or go to a Bible teacher or something, ask them their opinions, ask them what they feel, and then you form your own opinion from that.
Well, that's part of Bible study, isn't it?
Yeah.
But doing it not in a closed room. And this is, there's a movement even within our church that I think is a little bit troubling. The people basically, without any reference to other people, and sometimes without reference to the Bible, think and pray and wait for a sort of an illumination that comes from goodness knows where. It's called spiritual formation, and that if nothing else, it lays your mind open to delusions, and in a worst case, perhaps to the wrong spirit. No, we're to test the Bible, and part of testing that, ask your pastor a question. You know, there's many Adventists who became an Adventist. They asked the priest or the pastor of their church, say, about the Sabbath, and they got a reply that raised more questions, so they went to the Bible and checked it out for themselves. That's part of the testing process of knowledge that all of us should be part of. You don't just take it, as the President of the US says. There's fake news around, maybe not as much as he makes out. But, you know, different people for different reasons will give you, quote, facts. Test them. We're entering an age, I think, where there's so much knowledge. Daniel said that knowledge shall be increased. And what else did he say? You remember the text? And men shall run to and fro. And a lot of travel. Even my going to work every day is 70 miles each way. I'm bouncing around. There's a lot of knowledge, but yet also the Bible says ever learning and never arriving at the truth.
Yeah.
And you know, in your study in college, sometimes you can go over and over and over the same thing, but if you're not studying well, it's not sticking. Not sticking. So you have to have the right technique, the right state of mind. But I think the Reformation gave us a great model. The Bible alone is the root of our faith. Deep Bible study, recognition that we're before God, not church leaders that give us direction, you know, give us the only direction, but they're part of the structure of support structure. And of course your pastor can give you advice. He's someone that's studied more than most of us perhaps. You don't dismiss that out of hand, right? Let's go to you again as example A. Young man growing up in the Adventist church, in I hope a good family. What do you see it as your goal in the future, both to protect your own integrity and to witness to other people? Where are you going with this?
Well, for me, I see my faith as like the cornerstone to everything else I do. So most of every single decision I make is, I think, there's a movie that I remember watching. It's called, the movie is What Would Jesus Do? And for years, I saw these kids with bracelets, these bright orange bracelets on that said WWJD, what would Jesus do? And I see that as one of the main things in my life. And looking forward in my life, I see no matter what I'm doing, whether I'm a doctor, a lawyer, police officer, military, whatever God has planned for me, I'm going to always be witnessing for Him, you know, pointing people towards Him. They may not accept it, but then again, they might accept it. It's a personal decision for them, but I've made my personal decision to be always a witness for God.
And I'm trying to think, was it Daniel or Joseph? It says he purposed in his heart.
Daniel.
Yeah, to follow God. And that's really what it's about. None of us know the future, but we need to make that prior decision This is going to be my state of mind. And that's a decision very much in line, I think, with practicing religious liberty. Don't wait till the moment of test comes to think about what you'll do in a moment of test, right?
Yeah.
Determine ahead of time that you're set for heaven, you're set for God, you're set for witness. Do you remember your grandfather? You remember him a little bit?
I have very, very fond memories of my grandfather coming in the morning. Wake up! Wake up!
Right.
It's bright and early. Wake up!
A
wake
very
up!
optimistic person, wasn't he?
Very, very bouncy.
And I take some encouragement from him. In any situation I saw him, it didn't take him but a few seconds to share, few sessions or seconds to share his faith with whoever he met. It was just bubbling there. He wanted to tell.
Mm-hmm.
So I know he never thought, I must witness to this person. I'll wait for the opportunity. He had something. In fact, I have a book that Dad used to remind me of, Arthur Blessitt and Street Christianity. And he says, you've got to think of yourself like a drug dealer. He says, I want to share this thing, you know. Like, I've got a compulsion to share it. And Arthur Blessitt actually, at one stage back in the 60s or 70s, the drug era, he said he used to have little pill cases made with Bible texts in it. And he would come up to people in Hollywood Boulevard, hey, you want some Reds? He said. And I don't think that's really the style for everyone. But his view was that here he's got something that's just, their compulsion should be, his compulsion is to give, and they should want to have this precious little thing, a faith thought. And, you know, I think you and I, and as I saw it with my father, you know, we can use our religious freedom in a really positive way, can't we? In a powerful way that will change lives. And as we do it, it makes a difference. Again, young man on the brink of tomorrow. Religious liberty again. We've been talking more specifically than we usually do about religious liberty. Where do you think, not just you and me, where do we go, but where is this country going to protect religious liberty? Crazy times we live in. What can be done to protect it for all people?
Well, as long as in this country I see in the future, I'm looking, this is just my prediction. I see it, I mean, with the Pope coming and speaking to Congress, the first Pope ever to speak to Congress and the House, I see it going towards a Catholic country. I mean...
Well, that's not good, is it?
No,
because,
it's not good.
We don't want it to become a monolithic religio-political movement.
I also see... I'm not saying President Trump will do this, but future presidents maybe making the separation between the church and the state less of a separation, more of a church and state bond.
Well, does it bother you? I don't know if you read it, that the present Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, as he was, at the time he was being confirmed, he said publicly he didn't believe in the separation of church and state.
You told me about that, and when I heard it briefly, but I didn't believe it because of all the fake stuff.
He said it. It's not an obscure statement. And now he says he believes in religious liberty. But so would you encourage our present administration really defend religious liberty, not in religious entitlement, but religious liberty?
I believe yes, I would encourage our current administration to not only encourage the separation of church and state, but encourage individuals to believe what they want, how they want, when they want to worship, however which way that their heart believes that they should worship.
Watching the news, you might be inclined to think that we live in a time of reform. There is a litany of public officials and their heinous acts that are causing resignations and moral meltdowns all around us. But I don't think that qualifies as national reform or an example of even personal reform. I look at the Bible, and there's the example of King Josiah. A boy king came to power at a time of great wickedness. There was a coup that brought him to the front. He was backed by godly people, and he took matters into his hand, guided by the word of God and a calling of the people back to acknowledge God and to read his word. Surely we need that today. The Reformation was characterized by this sort of a dynamic. That was 500 years ago. But why should something so powerful 500 years ago be confined to the past? How about today? For Liberty Insider, this is Lincoln Steed.